Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to another episode of B is for Build. Thanks for joining us. In today's episode, we're trying to set a record. We're trying to be the first people ever to put a 6-speed gated shifter inside a Huracan. And then if we do that, and then we're gonna run the cabling to our manual transmission, we will have a manual stick shift Huracan, first in the world. So we better get started. Stay tuned. In the world of running these Graziano transaxles, using a manual shifter is actually kind of a bit of a technical problem. So this whole thing that bolts onto here is what changes it from an E gear to a manual basically. And so we have all the manual fixins, which you guys had seen. These clips are courtesy of ECS Tuning. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. So we've got our cable clips and this stuff. So we need to run cables to a shifter, and that's where the problem comes in hand. Shifters for the Graziano, you got a couple options. One company makes a billet one, but they wouldn't email me back, so I couldn't even buy one. Lamborghini makes one, and they're super expensive, and the Audi R8 also uses one as well, and they're a little bit less expensive, and I was able to find one. That's what this baby is right here. It's a $1,000 shifter unit. We actually ordered this from somebody that had used it over in Norway. So this is an Audi R8 Shifter, which is fantastic. It's going to work for what we need to do it, and it's got cables that run back to our transmission. So this is essentially, actually our transmission is actually built for an Audi R8, so we have the right shifting mechanism and the right cabling and the right transmission all to work together. So we should get really nice clean shifts. So once we were able to order that shifter, we had a tough time finding some of the other components that we needed to finish it out, like those clips that we have now and some other stuff that I'm going to show you a little bit later. But we finally got it all in-house, so now it's time to start working on the installation. So we're going to need to do a couple things. See, this car was never meant to have a manual shifter, so going right down the tunnel, you just have water lines, all sorts of water lines that run from the front all the way back down there. Well, we're building our own custom cooling system, so we don't really need those water lines. So we have to get all of those lines and everything that's inside that tunnel that runs back through here, we got to get all of that out and drop it all down to get out of our way to make room for this thing to go from the bottom up. And the game plan is, and it always has been, to land it right where that component is and basically delete this component or get rid of it and have our shifter come up through there like I showed you guys in the first episode of this build. So it's time to get started, so we're going to go ahead and dismantle the front end of the car, lift the car up, and pull everything that's in that center tunnel out of the car. So we got everything out from underneath. It was like 3 different coolant lines, a vacuum line, an extra coolant line, a couple AC lines, a lot of stuff is all out from inside that tunnel. And don't worry, we have plans to make it all work and replace it all and put it back together. We test fit the shifter, it fits within the width. So now the next thing we need to do is go over here, scope out our spot where we want our shifter to come through, which is right there. And we gotta engineer ourselves a hole. We gotta drill a hole in the car. All right, we made our first damage in the car. We drilled our pilot hole. That is kind of the center of our working area. And we drilled it, we're right on the center line. I went underneath there, and there's only 2 things underneath there now. It's brake line for one side and a brake line for the other side. So I spread those brake lines out in this area. So this is the beginning of our piece, and this is the end of our piece that we are using to kind of house this. So I want to show you this and mention a company that really helped us out huge on this. So this is our gated shifter. This is a 6-speed gated shifter kind of housing. This is a really expensive, really awesome piece made by Audi that gates our shifts and make sure that we don't get in the middle of a shift or anything like that. And this piece was super hard to find, along with a couple other pieces like these cable clips back here. There was a lot of research and it was actually really hard to get these and this bracket right here. And they were all provided to us by ECS Tuning. ECS Tuning is a great company that's helped us out a ton in the past on all sorts of different projects that we've had. They carry parts for BMW, Audi, Volkswagen, and as you guys know, a lot of Audi parts kind of transfer over to Lamborghini as well. And I'm not sure, they might carry parts for other brands as well as different generic parts, upgrade kits, oil change kits, all sorts of great stuff, guys. So I'm gonna put a link in the description. I wanna give them a huge shout out and a huge thanks for helping us out with these parts. And you know, something like this, quite expensive and really, really nice touch to have on this build. So huge thanks to them. Links in the description, guys. If you have a German car, check out their site for sure. So getting back to this is our gated shifter, and we have to have this in here, but what we're trying to do is basically hide this underneath this, because we want it to still look like pretty much factory Lamborghini, and this big round thing protruding through here wouldn't really give that look. But also, well, we definitely immediately thought, why don't we 3D print a version of this with the gates in it? But if you did that, the plastic is too brittle and it would break when you missed and you hit one of the gates. They would just snap off because they're not really strong enough. So we're going with the game plan of hiding this essentially underneath this. It's going to be very challenging, but I think we can do it. So what we got to do now is install this back in the car. We're going to measure the depth so we can tell how much room we have for this. That'll tell us how far down we need to mount this into the car and some other things, and that'll also tell us the shape and size of the hole that we're going to be cutting. Figured out all our measurements, our schematics, our cut path, our everything, and we didn't really learn too much. All we figured out really is that we got to slide this thing through there to get started. So we have to cut a hole large enough for this base to go up. We know that this part doesn't need to go up. Obviously it doesn't need to mount on top, or we could just mount the whole thing on top. That'd be fantastic. Can't do that though. So this base needs to be able to slide up to get these things to be about ground level on the carbon there, which is that right there. So we've marked out a square. Kyle's gonna cut that out, and while he does that, I'm gonna work on this. What we gotta do is hollow out the bottom of this and then cut the opening that we want to see in this as well. So it's gonna be a line that goes from here across to about here, and then up, across, down, keeping some of the body lines, and we're just gonna make kind of like a, should have paid attention to my shapes better in kindergarten, somewhat skewed rectangular shape hole in this with a hollowed out bottom. Alright, Kyle did a phenomenal job of cutting our square for us, so that's all ready to go. Now I'm going to grab the Dremel tool, make my marks, and hollow this baby out very carefully. Alright, we took our shifter and deleted the shifting part and turned it into basically a bezel. Well, it looks really nice, and it's got the right finish. This is what was underneath it that had all the like control housings and stuff like that. So we hollowed that out because that's our mounting points into the car, right? And it makes our height be perfect. And then this clips into here, and once we get a shifter boot, that'll go between this and this. We'll throw the shifter boot inside here, so it'll cover this all up nicely, and it'll just look like a shifter boot with this as the trim. So now we are ready to go ahead and clip these two things together, come back over to the car, and throw our shifter in from underneath and start to see the height of where things are going to land and where we want to mount that height-wise inside the tunnel. We got the shifter fed up through the bottom, and we got a floor jack on it right now. It's not exactly centered where it needs to be, but it was close enough to give us the measurements we need. So then we went ahead and marked out the cut area that we need to do on our, this is our like weird, like trans tunnel cover thing. And so we're gonna have to cut out that whole circle that's in yellow right there. Then that'll allow us to start placing some of the other parts of the shifter. So we got our location figured out. We found out that we're gonna have to buy ourselves a little bit more real estate because hitting this reverse is it's a pretty far throw, and if we raise this up anymore, it's gonna start to run into the MMI. But I think we got a really clean way to do that, so we're not too worried about it. So the next thing that we got to do is this piece is what the gate actually bolts to, but it has two tabs, one here and one here, that we're not using. So we got to cut these two tabs off, and then we got to center this piece up right here and just do a little bit of channeling on our carbon fiber to make room for these notches so it can sink down, and then we'll be able to bolt our gate to them. All right, we've got the shifter in place. We've kind of sat down in here and felt around and made sure it all seems natural and feels good. It's nice, it's straight, and everything is the way we want it. So that's all good. And I think the placement of it is as good as we're going to get due to the circumstances along a lot of this different stuff. So I'm very happy with how that landed. Now, I wish we could kind of leave it like this, but we are gonna have to cover that stuff up with the rest of the plastics and stuff like that. And we'll show you the game plan for that in a little bit. So what this means we gotta do now is permanently mount this thing. So right now it's just sitting there with a jack underneath it, and we need to fix that. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull that thing out. I've measured how far off the bottom of the base of that thing is down here. It's kind of sits about down here, and then what we're going to do is build some standoffs that will bridge that gap between the bottom of the carbon fiber there. Then we're going to be drilling up through and sending a bolt on each of the four corners down through the carbon fiber, through the standoffs onto the bottom of the thing, which will then throw a nut on, and it will very, very, very strongly secure that thing right there in place. All right, we got the standoffs all welded onto this piece. Now this piece gets bolted back, kind of how the factory did it, back onto the shifter housing, and we're gonna throw it in from underneath. Now the next thing we gotta do is go ahead and drill our holes. We're gonna drill from the bottom side up through here. You can see there's like a little bit of padding there, a little bit of space there. That's the space we're utilizing, and then we're gonna go buy some bolts and drop those bolts down and catch on the bottom side of our standoffs. All right, we got the shifting mechanism installed through these 4 bolts that you can see right here. There's one here, and then hidden under here, there's 2 more bolts. So that's really cool. This thing is in here really, really nice and strong. So the next thing we got to do is go ahead and reinstall the gate over it, and we're gonna throw a bunch of the trim pieces on as well. All right, we got the gate installed in there again, and we got our armrest and our MMI installed. Now, we were gonna install the rest of the center trim to make it look really cool, but we don't have it. which is a bummer. When we originally sold this car, we sold it kind of as a package, and they said, yeah, we sold a couple of the small interior pieces, but we have replacements for those. So we'll bundle it all up for you guys so you can have it. And then it's kind of like every time we turn a corner, we're missing one piece or another. So that's kind of a bummer. But you know who's been saving our butt with this is a different company. Mullins, the guys that hooked us up with all the awesome electrical systems so we were able to actually make this car turn on. They've been helping us out a ton on this build. So we need a shift knob. I've got an idea.
The next day we woke up, hit the airport, packed a bag that weighed exactly 50 pounds, full of the unused Mullins ECUs, teleported to the bar for some pre-flight cocktails, late for the flight, walking was harder than it should be, found a coat hook that made no sense to me and seemed to go upside down for no reason at all, last aboard the plane in Beers for Build fashion, and 3 hours and 5 minutes later we were in St. Louis. The next morning we headed over to Mullins' shop across the river in Illinois to check out some Huracan parts. I was taking a really close look at their Huracan donor car to see what else we could use from it. And I checked out the new headlights that I just bought from them, and then we found this beauty of a rear hatch that we were starting to scheme up how we could make this work with our turbos, which you'll see later on the channel. And then we found it, our shift knob.
Oh man, that's perfect.
That is good.
We just had to go all the way to Illinois to get a shift knob. Yep, this is exactly where you find shift knobs. All right, let's get this uninstalled.
Once we got our shift knob out, it being from Illinois needed a little taste of St. Louis, so we took it to the Broadway Oyster Bar for some crawfish mac and cheese, the Four Hands Brewery for some beer that's made with 2 extra hands, the Anheuser-Busch Plant for some Bud Light, Emo's Pizza for some St. Louis style pizza, Calico's for gooey butter cake, Sugar Fire for some barbecue, the Arch, because you have to, played beer pong at the stadium, found the biggest bar in the world, and finally wrapped it out with some White Castle. Now the shifter's ready to come home.
All right, now our shift knob is back home. If you couldn't tell, we actually found out we didn't have these trim pieces before we went to the Mullins guys. But anyways, a couple thousand miles round trip, we got a shift knob back on here. So let's, we're gonna kind of visualize this a little bit and see how it would look to kind of top it off before we run the cabling. That's not too shabby. So our shift boot is actually going to be a lot bigger because we have a bigger opening. It's going to kind of come up to back there and around there. But I like the red stitching and the same color like leather that Audi, this is off of an Audi, that Audi uses. So I think we're going to stick with that theme. Same type of leather, same type of red stitching right down the middle. And we're going to build a custom shift knob, but I just really wanted to have that there. So there's the visualization of what it looks like. The first stick shift Huracan in the world. Pretty proud of that. Now, to make this thing actually shift things, we got to come back here. Now ECS Tuning, really, I already mentioned, hooked us up big time on this. They helped us hunt down the right cable ends. This one was especially hard to find. So they sent us out the right cable ends as well as this bracket, not a cheap little piece of metal, that bolts in right here. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna bolt in the bracket, we're gonna run our cables, we're gonna clip them in here, and then we're gonna attach them to our cable ends, and then when we shift the shifter up there, it'll shift our transmission back here. All right, we're all connected up now, and we can shift through the gears. Let me show you how it looks. Over here and up, that's first, and then that's second, and then over third, fourth, fifth, and sixth. So it's being just a touch stubborn because, I mean, we haven't really tuned any of that cabling or anything like that, but that's first, second, third, fourth, and then it's getting a little stubborn to fifth and sixth. And then back to the center. So it's getting a little stubborn. We were messing with the cable ends a little bit, but as we get, once we get our clutch fluid in here, because we're changing out our clutch for a higher horsepower clutch. Once we get that all done, and especially if we get drive shafts and stuff like that, we'll make some changes to it, make it feel a little bit better, but it will work, and it will work just like OEM because it is all OEM, which is pretty great. Audi transmission, Audi cabling, Audi shifter. It'll all work great as soon as we kind of fine tune it. All you do is jump up and down a little bit on these threads right here, see? Which, see, I just messed it up right there. We did it! We're stick shifting in a Huracan. Alright guys, that is a wrap. Thank you so much for watching. We obviously had a ton of fun out in St. Louis. Huge thanks to the guys at Mullins for the hospitality. I'm going to put a link in the description. And we found some really cool stuff that we're going to be picking up for this build. So I'm jazzed on that. We already got some really cool stuff in the works. Also, huge thanks to ECS Tuning for hooking us up with those shifter parts. Those are really, really hard to find. So if you have some really niche, specialty, hard to find parts, make sure to check them out. Or if you're looking for oil change kits, service kits for your German cars, check them out. Also, link in the description. Thank you guys so much for watching. We had a fun little time away, but we are 100% back home and focused on this thing, and stuff's gonna start coming at you a little bit faster. So stay tuned for that. See you guys soon. Peace!